And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Translators on Air. My name is Dmitry I'm your host. Joining me today, my incredible co-host, Elena Tereshchenkova. Hi, Elena.
Hi, everyone.
And our guest today, Dorota Pawlak. Hi, Dorota.
Hi, everyone.
Dorota is a translator and localizer. She's the owner of DP Translation Services and Polish Localization. She runs online courses on website localization and intercultural communication. She also writes for her two blogs and enjoys sharing her experience as a speaker at industry events. She's also the co-owner of All-round Translator Events that helps translators run their businesses more efficiently. Dorota holds an MA in Translation and in Multilingual Computing and Localisation. And today we're going to be talking about localization, what opportunities and the challenges mobile world presents for translators, how to become an app localizer, and how to keep developing your expertise in app localization. So a very interesting topic, but before we jump to it, I would like to make a few announcements, as always. The fourth season of Translators on Air has been sponsored by our friends at SmartCat. SmartCat developed a great platform where you can find more work, meet new clients, collaborate with your existing clients, use their CAT tool absolutely for free. So please check out SmartCat by clicking the green shiny button below this video, or if you're watching or listening this in the recording, you can always visit the first link in the description. Alrighty, we have quite a few people tuning in. Let me quickly pull the list of viewers. Hello, Aurelie. Hello, Becky, Abdul Nasir, Adriana, Nancy, Andrei, Jakub, Alice, Virginia, Greece. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I can see a few new faces here, so let me quickly explain how this platform works. This is a live webinar. Everything is happening in real time. You can participate in the conversation by using the chat window on the right-hand side. You can say hi and hello. And if you have a specific question and you want Helena, Dorota, and me to answer your question and discuss it, you can use an Ask a Question section below this video. We already have quite a few questions there posted. You can upvote the questions that you are most interested in, or you can submit your own questions, and we will be happy to discuss them. We have also created a quick poll. It's right next to the Ask a Question section. It would be great if you could take this quick poll, and it will give us a better idea about your experience in localization. The poll says, do you currently work in localization? We have only one person voted yes. I don't know who it was. But if you guys can take the poll, it will give us a better idea about your experience in localization and what we should be focusing on in this webinar. And of course, these webinars are best enjoyed with friends and colleagues. We still have a few spots left. So take a few moments and share the link. You can find it above in your browser window. Post it on Twitter, or LinkedIn, or Facebook, or anywhere you want to. And invite your friends and colleagues to join us, because more people, more fun. All right, Dorota, over to you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and invitation.
We are really excited to have you on our show, and I think we haven't been talking about app localization that much during all four seasons, so I'm hoping to learn a lot about this topic, and I hope that our viewers today and people who will be watching this in recording will also learn something new. I already made a quick introduction, but could you please, for the record, say a few things about yourself and how you ended up in this awesome profession?
Sure. So I have background in languages and technology. I'm Polish. I studied in Poland, Vienna, Limerick, and now I live in Amsterdam. So yeah, as you said, I run my business called Polish Localization. I teach online courses, and I have this thing with Ellen Singer. We run All-round Translator Events, so it's a workshop for translators. How I started, well, I think it happened naturally. Well, my specialization in mobile app localization, it's not something I woke up one day and decided to localize or translate mobile applications. I think this kind of chose me. I never really knew if I want to have a career or study languages or technology. I always thought if I choose only one, I would have to reject another one. Until I discovered localization. So first, I specialized in software localization, then websites, then games, and then smartphones appeared on the market, and then mobile apps appeared on the market. So it was like a natural move. So first I translated or localized apps for agencies, later for developers. And I think my knowledge of mobile apps or mobile app localizations really deepened when I was working on my master thesis. So it was about mobile app localization. I was researching whether the quality of localization has any impact on popularity of mobile apps on the specific market. So I was analyzing apps localized into Arabic. And in case you're wondering, the localization quality has absolutely no impact on popularity. Well, of course, there are many factors. Yeah, there are many factors at play, but the high quality localization is not the most important one. So anyway, well, already before I was like analyzing apps for my blog posts. So I was researching apps, like comparing apps in different language versions to see if there are any errors, just to mention them on my blog articles. But actually, as a side effect, I learned a lot about challenges or strategies you can use when you translate localized mobile apps. So you can compare different parts of applications in different languages. You can choose, well, you can see, of course, many errors and then think what would be your solution. But you can also see some good strategies, good examples, and then learn from it and use in your future projects. So, well, that's in short my journey to where I am now in terms of mobile app localization.
Great. From your personal experience, what are some of the opportunities and challenges the current mobile world presents to translators?
So there are many opportunities. We can be involved in the mobile world as a translator, but also as testers or as localizers or consultants. So we can consult, we can work with developers already before the application is developed to, for example, tell them what they should keep in mind when they develop an app. For example, they should keep in mind that they have to provide more space because other languages are usually longer than English, right? So we need more space for button names or for menu items, or basic things like they should use the right encoding so that our characters could be supported. So we can be involved as a localization consultant. We can test applications. We can translate or localize applications. So there are quite many things we can do when it comes to mobile app localization, but there are also many challenges. So mobile apps are totally different from regular documents. So they have different format. The text has different format. And well, the most important challenge is that there are character restrictions, right? So the screen is very small. And usually there's no space for amazing texts or amazing graphics unless your texts are amazingly short. So you have to search for a compromise between great layout, great graphics, and great texts. So you need to be very creative to fit your translation in a very limited screen, a very limited area for buttons, for example, or menu items. What else? Well, yeah, you have to be able to rephrase many phrases, many strings that are used in original versions. So what I learned, for example, from comparing applications in different languages was how simple buttons of on and off can be translated. So back then it wasn't something obvious to me. Now many people already talk about it. So a few years ago, I compared the button on and off in the settings screen in Android. So it was for 5 languages, I think German, Dutch, Spanish, English, Polish, and Russian, or 6 actually. So it's very easy to have the button on and off, like the text for this button fit into a very small space for English and Dutch, because it's just 3 letters, but then, and for German. But then for languages, for Slavic languages like Polish and Russian, we have very long words from on and off. So then it gets abbreviated. It was abbreviated back then on Android. But if you are a new user, if you are just, you use your mobile application, mobile phone for the first time, smartphone for the first time, you can be really confused because then it's almost the same word. Like in Polish, it's wąż, wyłącz, in Russian, wkrócić, wykluczyć, it's just 1 letter difference. And then it gets abbreviated. And then if there's no other effects like colors or swiping, you don't really know which one is on, which one is off. And then in Spanish, they came up with a brilliant idea just to say yes and no, so sí and no, so which is just 2 letters. It will fit any space and a button. Yeah. So yeah, so that's example of how you can rephrase the original text to be able to come up with something short that will be understandable for the users, but that will also fit the layout. Other challenges, well, it's of course the variables. So very often when you translate mobile app or website or software, you have to deal with the code. You can see the tags in the text you translate or variables. And when you translate into a very inflected language, like Slavic languages, you have to know what the variable stands for, because then you will know how to translate the words around variables, right? You have to know if the variable represents a digit or a word, or which word, especially when you have numbers, like right, in Slavic languages, you have different plurals for different numbers. So we have to know these things to be able to translate correctly, to localize the application correctly. And very often, again, we have to rephrase the string, for example, to use a colon, so that we can use only one general form, but regardless of the numbers, for example, that will be combined in the, will be replaced later by a variable. Well, other challenges can be, we have to deal with other challenges. For example, when there are pictures or symbol or icons. When we adapt the product, the mobile application, to another market, we have to check if the graphics, symbol, icons will work for that culture as well. Quite often we don't have to change anything, but in some cases we'll have to tell that our client or the developer that, well, they should maybe change some icons or colors, or maybe replace the graphics. And finally, buttons is very easy. It seems easy to translate a button name, but actually it's not. You can't really, in some cases, localize a button name correctly if you don't see it, if you don't press it or click it to see how it works. There might be some side effects. There might be, I don't know, some animations. So actually, ideally, you should, of course, download and install the application, check it out before you localize it. But in some cases, the application is not ready. It's not available in the App Store when you translate it or localize it. So then there are even more challenges, because you need more reference materials, or you need to ask the developers to give you an access to the product to see it before you translate it or localize it.
Yeah. That sounds like absolutely a lot of work, and actually localization is. Yeah. You mentioned some strategies for solving some more language-related issues. What are some approaches and strategies that we can use to help create a mobile app that is adjusted to our cultures? Because cultures can be as different as languages are.
Mm-hmm. I think in the ideal scenario, we could be involved already in the process of developing the application. It happens very rarely, but some developers are aware of that, especially for some specific cultures like Middle East, right? So they like to consult an expert, a translator or a localizer. And then you can already, on that stage, before the application is developed, you can already tell them what kind of graphics or what kind of layout you can use in your app, colors, or simple thing, you should simply know your target users. Maybe the target users of your original mobile app in your prime market are totally different than your target users on your target market. So you have to know what are their preferences. If they will be interested in your mobile application, maybe your mobile app has potential on your local market, but it won't be really attractive to the foreign users. Maybe it will be attractive only if you adjust it, change some items or add some items. So in the ideal scenarios, the translators could be already involved in the process of creating the application. If it's not the case, when the application is already developed, then of course, before we start to translate it or localize it, we should really explore the application. We should not only focus on the text, but also on the user interface, on the graphics, on the layout. See how we could help the developer, the client, to make it more aligned with the cultures, with the needs of our target customers. And we should really talk to the client or to the developer to check if they really know their target audience, their target users, because maybe they don't, and then we can help them understand their needs, their expectations, or maybe there are some habits. So in different regions, in different cultures, mobile users could be used to something else. They could, they can prefer to see different elements in a game than on another market. So we have to know these differences to be able to adjust the product accordingly.
Makes sense. You mentioned that a lot of times you have to actually test the app before starting the localization process. You have to explore all the elements. What are some other technical skills that you might need if you want to be an app localization, apart from being able to test apps and understand how they work?
Knowledge of programming languages will be useful. Well, you don't have to be able to develop apps. Of course, that could be a useful skill, but it's not necessary. What's the most important is to have passive knowledge of programming languages. So applications are developed in many different languages, but I think the basics, what you could start from is HTML5 and XML, maybe a bit of Swift or Python, because these languages are used quite often. But I think for a start, it's enough to know, or to at least to look at the typical code of the HTML5 application, or to know how to process and use XML files, because very often what will you receive from your customer is a file that has extracted strings from all the parts of application. So sometimes it will be an Excel file, which is very easy to process. You can just feed it to your CAT tool and work on it. But sometimes it will be an XML file, which again contains strings from different parts of application, and then you have to know what to do with it. It seems obvious, well, you just can put it to your CAT tool, but in some cases, your CAT tool will still display the codes, the tags from the file. So then you will have to maybe use some filters to filter out the code and see only the translatable text. So yes, you will need some knowledge of programming languages, at least passive knowledge. And actually, programming languages are very fascinating as human languages. They also have grammar and syntax and vocabulary. So once you have a look, you can have a look at tutorials, on-air tutorials for developers, just to see how a programming language looks like. So to be able to work on such files. Then, of course, you have to know CAT tools very well, the CAT tools that you will use to localize applications. Sometimes you might be asked to work in some internal tools, so you won't be able to use your tool. You will have to use the tool of your developer or of the agency. So I think that's the most important skills when it comes to technical side of mobile applications. So the programming code, the programming language, and ability to process the files in your CAT tool.
You also mentioned something about handling files with variables. Can you tell us a little bit more about the variables? Why do app developers use them? And what are some of the tactics and strategies translators can use when translating app strings and documents that contain variables?
Right. So the variables are the very first thing that developers learn, because it simplifies their life. But actually, it could be a nightmare for translators or localizers. So how it works, it could be a general sentence like, I don't know, delete X files, right? And X represents a digit, like delete 5 files, delete, I don't know, 7 files. And they wouldn't put a number, they would just put a percentage sign, for example, with letter S or D, for example. And that's how it's saved in the file. And then you get to see such a string and you have to translate and localize it. But you can't really correctly translate it if you don't know what the variable stands for. You have to know if it's a number or a noun, and if it's a number, how big can be that number. Because for some languages, as I said earlier, you will have to change the noun form depending on the number. So sometimes you can change the word order in the original string. So you could put the variable which stays for the number at the end. So you could put delete, delete the number of files you want to delete, colon, and the number, right? So then if you translate it to your language, let's say to Russian or Polish, it will be always correct because you don't have to change the form of the noun depending on the digit or the number. Basically, we have to know what the variable stands for. And so we have to ask the developer for some examples. It doesn't have to be a number. It can be a name. If it's for example, if you localize a game, it could be a character name because it may represent many different character names depending on the gameplay. Or it could be an item that is used in the game, or it could be username, it could be anything. So you have to, in the ideal scenario, the developer would add a comment and say, well, this variable stays for this and this. So then you know how to translate it, how to go about it.
Yeah, I wish every developer done that. From my personal experience, this is a very rare occasion.
Yeah, well, it depends also on who you work with. If it's an agency, you get the feedback very, very often. So even if you want to know what a variable or whatever else means, it takes a lot of time to get your answer. If you work with small or independent developers, the communication is very often smooth and easy, and you can get your answers quite quickly.
Yeah, but the problem is that a lot of times developers don't know that before they start localizing the game. Also, and then it's like a huge surprise for them that actually they have to be very involved in the localization.
Yeah, that's true.
Answer tons and tons and tons of questions from translators.
That's why probably the ideal scenario is to work with a developer who also has a team of in-house translators for some languages who can at least explain what some challenges of localization might be. But yeah, some of us are lucky enough to work with such ideal clients, but it's not always the case. Yeah.
I once had a client. They actually commented on every single string, and the length of the text of the comments. They were so elaborate, and they were so thorough that the comments themselves were longer, much longer than the text.
The strings.
Yeah, than the strings. And they were explaining everything from what variables are they using to what kind of what particular words mean or particular phrases mean. For example, for those who don't know slang, because there was quite a bit of slang in their game, and they actually explained all the slang and what it means. So this was like a Christmas present for me, because you don't get it very often.
Yeah, I now have a client who answer my questions, any of my questions, I don't know, within a couple of hours. And that's really great. And they react to everything, and I'm able to work with my reviewer, and it's really
perfect.
A treat to work on that app. Yeah, because when people understand, and they also understand the importance of tone and things like that. So I really enjoy working with them. So how can what steps can translators make to become app localizers? How do they how can they start their career in app localization?
I think you need 4 items, 4 elements. So first, of course, you need to know your cut tool. So first, you need to have skills to be able to work as a mobile app localizer or translator. So you need to know your cut tool very well. For example, you can download sample application files from online tutorials, feed it to your cut tool, and see what happens. Sometimes you will not be surprised, and sometimes you will learn a lot just from experimenting. So you can experiment and check a typical application file without the time pressure that you would have in a real life project. And from that, you can learn a lot. So you have to know the tools, you have to have the right tools and know how to use them. Another element is, well, you have to be mobile application fan, right? So you have to be excited about mobile applications. You could do what I did. You could just change language in your phone and then compare different mobile application versions, different language versions, how it is in the original version, how it is in your version, in your target language, to see how certain problems, certain challenges were solved. Well, you have to remember also that for mobile applications, unlike with documents or marketing texts, what's the most important is functionality. So even if your text is great, even if your translation or localization is great, it will not be really useful if your reader, if it doesn't work, if the application doesn't work, or if it's not really clear for the user. So the main focus is on functionality when it comes to mobile application. And another key item is that you have to think like an app user. So even when you translate an application, localize it, you have to review it from the perspective of the user. So you have to know who is the target user. Well, actually, you should ask this question before, so to know how to adjust the style of the application. Not all applications are developed for entertainment. It's not always about fun and games. Some applications have some practical purposes. It could be some tools. So you have to know what's the purpose of application and who is your user. And then once you are done, translate and localize, then you just have to think from the perspective of the target user, if your work makes sense. And you have to learn to read the code, at least to be able to distinguish between translatable and untranslatable strings. You have to know how to deal with tags and code. So once you have these skills, you can, well, you could also join some courses, right? It could be, I haven't seen any courses for mobile app localization. I only seen courses for localization, online or offline. Usually it's online courses. There's, for example, a very good course on Udacity called Localization Essentials. It's mainly for developers, but you can also learn a lot if you're only a translator. So you can follow some online courses. You can follow online tutorials for developers to learn a bit about the code. Another great idea is to follow developers online. So you can hang out where they hang out. So you can use, you can join their Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups when they're, I don't know, discuss their problems, their challenges. You don't have to participate in these discussions, but you can at least observe and see what are the problems, or see what kind of language they use when they talk about localization. Maybe what we call localization for them is only translation. So then you can use the phrases or simply the language that they use to communicate with them, right, when you want to offer your services, to be able to find some common ground to communicate. Because some developers see localization only as a technical process, and what we do, right, or the translators do, is for them only translation, even though we do much more than just translating. So you have to know how they think and what's their view on translation or localization. Another thing is to visit events, so join real-life face-to-face events where you could meet developers, but also develop your knowledge. So it could be conferences, it could be meetups, it could be some local meetups for IT or technology professionals. So if it's a conference, if it's a presentation, you can learn a lot about your target market, about the industry. But you could also meet a lot of people. It won't necessarily be your customers. Sometimes it will be just people who will inspire you, or people who will simply be a part of your network. And sooner or later, maybe they will become your customers. But even if not, it's still okay, because you are there to deepen your knowledge. So visiting events is a great idea. Being present online is very useful. Another good idea is to read a lot about mobile technology, or you could read blogs on mobile application, mobile technology. There are special platforms, either dedicated only to mobile industry, like Mobile App Daily or Mobile News Magazine, or technology related websites like the Next Web or DZone. They are for technology in general, but they both have sections on mobile. So this is how you can know more about the mobile industry. And also find a way to make some contacts with people who inspire you, motivate you, people who can be your potential customers. So I think these are the important steps you could take to start working in mobile app localization industry, or to develop your knowledge and your skills.
Great advice. Would you like to recommend doing volunteer translations? For example, WordPress community has a lot of various plugins that people develop and offer for free. And I think it might be a good idea for somebody who is just starting out. Try to reach out to the developers of those free plugins and tools and offer your services. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. If you're new to the industry, if you want to learn something, you could do that too. You could offer, you could volunteer, translate, localize some parts of application for free just to get some experience. But don't do it for too long, of course. Just enough to to learn something.
I think there are different views on volunteering as a translator or doing free app localization, and we actually had an episode with our colleague Michal Tosha, and I've just seen a question from him.
He's here.
Yeah, hi, Michal. I guess we should include the link to that episode in the show notes for this episode. I think it might be interesting for people interested in app localization who just joined us recently. If you guys haven't seen that episode, check it out. I think it was a great one. So I guess we can now take questions from our viewers. The first one is from Sandra. She's asking, since there's so much work involved in app localization, like having to actually use the app yourself and test it, maybe check images that the client sends you, how do you usually charge for it? Per hour, per project? How do you get an estimation?
Yes, that's a good question. I don't charge per hour, I charge per project. Well, it is actually related because you have to analyze all the items of the application. You could estimate how much time it will take you. But I think better idea is to charge per project, depending on how many things, do you have to do, how many items need your attention. So you can kind of try to calculate it in hours, then charge your hourly rate, but I would look into the whole project, how much work I will have to invest, how much time I have to invest, and also what are the benefits for the customer, because it's not only an application localized into the specific language, it's much more than that. A localized application, if it's done correctly and if it's later also marketed, promoted correctly, usually brings a lot of benefits for the customer. So charging your hourly rate may not be enough. You should also look into what the customer will benefit from your localization.
And how do app developers react when you say that you're charging per project? Is it something they're used to, or do you have any problems with that? With explaining why you're charging per project and not per word, like some localization and translation agencies?
Well, when I work with developers, I always give the price for the total project, and they never question that. They never ask for the price for a word, and they never ask me how many hours I'm going to spend on that. So they are if they agree on the total price, they have no further questions. Yeah. If it's, I don't know, too high for them, they try to negotiate. We try to, meet in the middle, or there's, we have to limit the scope of the project, for example. But usually, I think they are used to working with people who charge per project, not for a word or for an hour, as in the case of agencies.
Yeah, and I think that the primary focus of the estimate should be mostly on the value that you actually bring by localizing their app into the specific language, and not just on the dollar amount that they're going to be spending.
Yeah.
And the more you focus on the value, the easier it will be for them to justify the price, I think.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, Dorota, do you work only on app localization, or do you also work with video games and websites?
Mm-hmm. I also work on websites and games and software. There are not so many software localization projects because simply software in a traditional form is not so popular as it used to. Now it's more focused on websites and mobile applications. So yes, I localize also websites, games, and software from time to time, and IT texts.
So based on your experience, are there any similarities between localizing websites or games or software?
Mm-hmm. Well, the most important similarity is that you have to deal with a digital product. So it's not a document, it's not, a marketing brochure. It's a digital product that is made of the technical part and the textual part, and also somehow there are cultural items as well. So you get to deal with the code. You have to use special tools to translate or localize website, game, and mobile application. Well, for games, you need usually much more creativity. And if you then translate application, which happens to be a game as well, if you translate a mobile game, the challenge is even bigger, because first of all, you have to be creative to recreate the word, the game word, but also you need even more creativity to keep it short and attractive. So yeah, I think there are many similarities, but there are also many differences. So like the biggest difference is that mobile applications are created for small screens. So with it come many different challenges, and also mobile apps have to work fast. They have to load fast. So that's why they are quite limited, like graphics. Sometimes there are limitations related to graphics, like the graphic the developer would like to use, or the translator would like to recommend can't be used because of the technical limitations. So yeah, I think if you already have experience in websites or in games, it's quite easy to specialize in mobile applications as well.
Right, interesting. We have a question actually from Spiros. Are there ambiguities and deviations when localizing from major languages, for example, English, into minor ones, for example, Greek, or vice versa?
Well, I think the biggest challenge here will be the fact that languages as Greek or Arabic or Polish or Russian are highly inflected languages. So English is very simple. That's why most of developers use variables all the time, and they don't think about what will happen later once the application has to be translated. But for other languages, well, first of all, the text becomes longer. It's much longer than English, so we need more space, or we have to abbreviate it or rephrase it, or we have to keep asking about the variables, what they mean, or we have to keep asking for the context, because in English, well, you can use one word and it could be both a noun or a verb, but then if you translate it, you have to know what is it exactly. I think, yeah, we usually tend to ask much more questions to know more about the context, to be able to translate it and localize it correctly.
Another question is from Michal. He's asking, what is your view on machine translation and post-machine translated editing? I mean, probably in respect of mobile app localization.
Well, in terms of mobile applications, I personally wouldn't use machine translation, or I wouldn't use post-editing. I think mobile apps and websites and games, they need a human touch. Well, you could argue that, well, you can use an engine that will translate it for you, especially if it has a glossary adapted for the specific text, for the specific terminology. but still every product when it comes to mobile application is actually unique, and you need a lot of creativity, especially if it's a game, a mobile game. So I wouldn't use machine translation or post editing for that purposes, but maybe there are people who would and would be happy with that.
I think that I've come across some apps that were machine translated into Russian. From my point of view, as a user and as a translator, it was a disaster. I remember using one app, and it was actually, it wasn't localized when I started using it. And then one day they rolled out an update, and I just couldn't continue using it because it was just so bad. And I think it might work probably for some languages, although I'm sure that colleagues working into those languages would disagree. But from my point of view, it might work for some languages, but definitely not for languages like Polish and Russian, which are, as you say, highly inflected. And we have to keep in mind all those options when translating something, and machines just can't do it. So. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah. What also happens quite often is that the app descriptions in App Store are machine translated. Like the app is not localized, but the description is. And it's very often so terrible that I can't imagine how the authors or developers can think that after reading that description, someone will be tempted to download the application.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, you need a lot of creativity even for the description of the application, which is actually the most important item because it kind of encourages you to download and install the application.
Exactly.
But not everyone is aware of that.
I've actually seen some developers they were probably using Google Translate to reply to comments that users left for the app. And I could see what English phrase they were using. And in English, it sounded friendly and upbeat. That's just the way I think the majority of the developers talk and communicate, right? But when run through the Google Translate in Russian, it was just some strange gibberish and it didn't make much sense. Sometimes, a couple of times it was offensive. And I think I even wrote them so that, to warn them so that they don't do that again, because it just sounded strange,
Well, that's the language barrier, and it's very difficult to overcome that. I wish every developer had the budget to translate comments, but in reality, they probably won't be able to do that.
There is a great solution that my dream app developer I'm working with my ideal app developer I'm working with is using. I've actually just translated it. They have one comment that they leave to all replies, and then if they need to, so they don't run it through Google Translate. They let me translate that comment, and that comment says something along the lines of, "Thank you for your comment. Please write in English. Please send your message in English at," and then there's their email address, and they're saying that they will take care of the problem. I think it's might be a good solution. Yeah.
All right. We have another question from Abdul Nasir. Are there things that should not be translated in strings or in content in mobile apps?
Well, yeah, you shouldn't translate part of code, right? So you could have string and suddenly the text changes color. So you see attack, that means you use another color, right? So you shouldn't translate anything that is between the tags, because that's the part of the code, and you should leave the variables as they are. So if it's a percentage sign and S or D, whatever, you should just keep it as it is. So yeah, you shouldn't translate the code.
What about the names of characters, for example, if we are talking about the video game, or what about the name of the app or the name of the game itself?
Well, here you have to talk with the developer or with your client if they want to have the names localized or they want to keep the names in English, for example. And about the name, in most cases, well, in some cases, the name will have to be translated or localized, because otherwise people will just not know what's the app for. So you'll have to agree with your customer on the best solution.
Yeah.
This is actually the problem with names of the characters in games is actually a big problem for the Russian language, right, Dmitry? Because sometimes customers want to leave them in English, and again, it makes sense for languages like French or German or Spanish or probably even Polish. But it really looks weird in Russian when something like John went, I don't know, John went to the castle, and everything is in Russian and written in Cyrillic, and only this John is in Latin letters. So
yeah. I had actually it's quite common because I don't know, maybe because customers are not aware that there are different languages with different alphabets that don't have Latin words in them, and quite often we have to put up a good fight to convince them to actually transliterate those at least, or maybe even adapt to make them sound more natural, and so they wouldn't stand out and make our eyes bleed.
Yeah, but that doesn't. I once had a client who wasn't an app developer, and the text I was working on was not an app. It was actually a story of a brand, and they wanted to leave the names in English. So that was there. I had to put up a real fight just to make them not do it.
Yeah, I think people overestimate the popularity of English in other languages. They think that if we say in France no English, or in Germany we know English, then people in other countries will probably have the basic understanding of English and know the pronunciation. And in reality, in countries like Russia, not everyone knows English, and some people have the opportunity to learn the language and they use it and they understand it, but the majority of people probably wouldn't be able to even read the name of the character or the name of the person, and they wouldn't be able to pronounce it, and it really breaks the immersion because you simply cannot understand the name of the character, you cannot remember it, and it's getting harder to immerse in the game world.
In any case, even if you can understand it and can read it, English names in Russian phrases just look really, really, really strange.
We have another question from Alice. Actually, it's a very interesting question. Well, have you experienced any problems with character restrictions when localizing apps? And if you have, how did you solve those problems? Time to share some horror stories.
Yeah, so the ideal scenario would be that you simply ask the developer to provide more space for a button, right, or for some menu item. But then there's no time for that or no willingness. They simply want, I don't know, the button name to be maximum 10 characters long. Well, 10 would be too much, even 5 characters long. And then you have language like Polish or Russian, and their words are long. And you need the 10 characters. Otherwise, you can't really say what the button is supposed to mean. So in this case, if the developer can't really change the code to provide you with more space, you can either ask them if there's a way to make the font smaller, and it happens quite often. I saw it in Android. That was, I think, on the screen with the email. When you send an email, everything has like a regular font, but suddenly like the button that says next. So it has four characters. In Polish, you needed 5. So they simply made the font smaller, which is okay in this case because 1 character difference is not that much. So even if you make the font smaller, it's still readable. But sometimes, again, if you make the font smaller, it's not readable anymore. So the whole user experience, it has an impact on user experience. So then what you can do, you can either abbreviate the word. It's not the ideal scenario because it might not be clear for the target user what it means. you can try to find another word that could be, you can simply rephrase the word on the button name, for example. You can try to find another word, you can rephrase it, or you can find if there is a way to use an icon or a symbol. Like there's a button next, for example, and in your language is very long, you can simply ask the developer to use an arrow, right? So that would represent next. So yeah, it all depends on the willingness of your developer to change some code to make the app more attractive. But if you then explain why you really think is the best solution to use an icon or to make the font smaller, then there should be more willing to change the code to make sure that the user experience is better.
Yeah. Actually, I read an article the other day, and I think the article was written by a product manager or designer at Dropbox, and it has thousands of shares. It was written on medium.com. And it seems like there is more and more awareness among the developers and designers themselves that they need to design for mobile devices, and that they have to provide more spaces for other languages. And I think it's a good trend because character limits are one of the most frequent problems that we face as game localizers and app localizers. And it's great to see that developers and designers themselves actually see this problem and try to build awareness. Actually, there is even a product that was developed to show the developers how the character limits will different per language. It was launched on Producthunt. It's a great website where you can discover new apps, different products. And the designer is actually a designer of Canva.com, and he worked with their localization team, and they frequently saw this problem where they have to localize the interface, and in other languages there are certain limitations and words are longer. So they designed a simple website. I think it's called hellopolyglot.com or something like that, where they you can type in the word, for example, a menu, text from menu or text from button, and it will show a machine translation, not the best option. The machine translation is not the best option, but at least it will give the developers an approximation how long it will, the word will look like in our languages. And I think they offer like 6 or 7 languages and pull the data from Microsoft API or something.
Another strategy to check about the character limitations for developers is they can use pseudo localization, which is a part of many tools like Alchemy Catalyst, for example. So they can simply run it. They can select the language, and then it will automatically place some characters from that language, and it will also show how much longer the strings will be, right? So they can simply use pseudo localization to see how they can adapt their code so that it supports another language, so then they don't have to change the code once the application is being localized.
Yep.
So we are nearing the 1 hour mark, and we have just one question left. You already mentioned some strategies to keep developing our app expertise. Is there anything else that we can do to be on top of of all the new things that are coming up in mobile app world, and to keep our expertise fresh?
I mentioned events, so that's quite important to be where your potential customers are, or to simply be somewhere where you can develop your knowledge on mobile technology, for example. Courses, online courses, also free courses are very useful. What else? There are books. There's actually only one book on mobile app localization. It's called Localizing Apps. It's not only about apps, actually, because then the author says that, well, the apps here will be also websites and software. So it's general about localizing, but there's some focus on mobile applications as well. So this book can be quite useful. Well, reading the news related to mobile technology, like Mobile App Daily or Mobile News Magazine, or you can follow, you can check Twitter for hashtags with mobile app, mobile technology. So you can find out even, you can find even more resources and more platforms. If you translate or localize Android apps, you can have a look at the website of Android Studio. I think it's Android Developer. There's a whole tutorial. It's very, very detailed. It's very specifically developed for developers, but then you can just read it to know how a typical app can be developed and what could be the challenges later when the app has to be localized. There are some sections about localization as well. And the same applies for iOS or Windows apps. So they also have their websites for developers, but also a section on localization. So you can learn from it quite a lot. And the blogs, you can learn a lot from blogs about mobile technology, mobile application. But I think it's really worthwhile to visit events like IT events, technology events. Very rarely there are events only about mobile technology and mobile applications, usually IT technology in general, but you can also listen to some presentations about mobile apps, and you can meet people. I think you learn a lot when you meet and talk to other people. They don't have to become your customers, you just learn from them, and that's exciting.
Yeah, meeting other people and communicating with them is actually the best way to learn, and that's why I want to thank you, Dorota, for meeting us online today. I hope that you guys enjoyed our talk and that you learned a couple of new things about mobile app localization. Please don't forget to check the website of our sponsors at smartcat.ai, or just by clicking the green button below or the first link in the description if you're watching this in the recording. And also don't forget to check out our website at translatorsonair.com and subscribe to our newsletter so that you don't miss future episodes. And please don't forget to share this episode with your friends and colleagues because they might also be interested in mobile app localization. And I guess we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.